Bodies are lying in a CT scanner in Peru right now that scientists can't explain. These aren't rumors. These aren't stories passed around online. These are physical specimens pulled from the desert near the Nazca lines. It's weird because unusual bone structures, three-fingered hands, and elongated skulls with internal chambers that don't match any known species have been found.
A Mexican journalist displayed bodies of two supposed non-human beings in Mexico, in front of the Congress in Mexico.
Some researchers are calling them authentic organisms. Others are calling them the most sophisticated hoax Peru has ever seen. But here's what makes this case impossible to ignore. The scans show trauma, metallic implants, and something even stranger inside one specimen. Scientists are stunned. And once you see what the imaging actually reveals, you'll understand why. This is the story of alien mummies found in Peru. What the CT scans actually show. Let's start with what you'd see if you were standing in that radiology room when the first body went through the scanner. The moment the images started appearing on screen, something became immediately clear. This wasn't a rushed assembly job. The bone layout held together. The joints lined up. The proportions followed patterns you don't get from gluing animal parts together, which is exactly what Peru's culture ministry had previously seized. Objects made from bones and synthetic materials that fell apart under basic examination. These bodies were different. Look at the hands. 3 long fingers, each with bone segments that articulate naturally. No obvious cut marks, no hidden supports. The CT slices don't show chopped bones jammed together. They show joints, actual joints like we have, with spacing and density consistent enough that forensic physician Dr. José de Jesus Zalce Benitez argued they correspond to organic, biofunctional, and skeletal anatomical authenticity. Now look at the skulls. Elongated, yes, but with sinus cavities, cranial plates, and consistent thickness across the dome. No plaster fill, no melted resin, just bone. And if someone manufactured these bodies, why would they imitate anatomical precision that no one would see unless they put them through CT imaging? The vertebrae stack cleanly. The rib cages are compact and shaped unlike a typical human thorax. Not human, but not randomly assembled either. José de Jesus Zalce Benitez examined multiple specimens and found what he described as integrated organisms rather than collages. Even the scans showed continuity in bone density. You'd expect mismatched readings if bones from different animals were combined. Instead, forensic teams found consistency. They used 3D reconstruction, fluoroscopy, and fingerprint studies, all of which suggested these were once living beings. Picture the radiologists frame by frame, looking for telltale signs of fabrication, cut marks where bones were joined, density variations where different materials met, structural weaknesses where artificial supports would be needed. They kept finding new questions instead. Internal chambers that didn't map neatly onto human anatomy. Proportions that challenged assumptions about what biological structures should look like. Even forensic archaeologist Flavio Estrada, who had previously concluded that some seized alien figures were assembled from animal parts and glue, had to acknowledge these bodies were more complex, more consistent, and far harder to dismiss outright than the artifacts he'd examined before. But the scans revealed something else. Bright, dense areas inside some bodies. Metallic densities. Not random fragments. Plates embedded in ways that implied integration with tissue. And just when researchers thought they'd cataloged every strange feature, the CT data revealed something that would split the scientific community wide open. The violence written in bone. CT scans don't just show anatomy, they show history. And what the imaging revealed about these bodies suggests they didn't die peacefully. Start with the specimen called Maria. The scans show deep cut marks across the pelvis, not surface scratches, but cuts with depth variation you get from force. Zoom into the lower vertebrae, and there's a broken bone at the base of the spine, plus a series of puncture marks traveling from the tailbone toward the hip. Then investigators found a zigzag wound pattern, the kind you'd expect from a high-impact fall or angled collision. Let's be very clear here. These sorts of injuries don't occur from a few everyday bumps and scrapes. The scans don't show splinters or inconsistent textures. They show trauma that happened before mummification. Move to the next specimen, Montserrat. Inside her rib cage, between ribs 5 and 6, the CT scan reveals a penetrating injury, an impact point that pushed inward hard enough to deform bone. Her scapula? Fractured. Ribs? Fractured. And the distribution matters because this isn't random breakage from mishandling after excavation. These are injuries consistent with someone upright, then struck with enough force to crush the thoracic area, the part between your neck and abdomen. Dr. Zals called this clear and irrefutable evidence that these bodies were biological beings who suffered violent events while alive. One specimen with such severe injuries raises eyebrows, but when multiple specimens start showing the same level of violence inflicted on them, you have to wonder why they were attacked and who attacked them. Then there's Antonio, whose trauma reads like a forensic case file. The CT images reveal a stab-like puncture that entered the chest, broke ribs, and traveled far enough to damage internal organs, a pattern confirmed by Dr. David Ruiz Vela's forensic review. Think about what this means. If someone fabricated these remains, they would have had to engineer trauma patterns that perfectly match skeletal articulation. Not impossible, but extremely unlikely. And the wounds show signs of perimortem trauma, damage inflicted close to the time of death, not centuries later. Here's what makes the trauma evidence so compelling. The fractures appear in biomechanically logical locations. When Maria's spine broke, it broke at a stress point where vertebrae naturally fail under impact. When Montserrat's ribs fractured, they fractured in a compression pattern you'd see in living bone responding to force, not brittle ancient bone breaking from handling. The injuries followed coherent patterns: compression, penetration, falls, and blunt force, and each wound matched the body structure it appeared in. No mismatched surfaces, no joints popping out of alignment under imaging pressure. Multiple specimens showing patterns of violence raises obvious questions. We've seen it at archaeological sites before. Who hurt them? Why were several individuals showing similar injury patterns? But before we can answer those questions, we need to understand how these bodies even reached a CT scanner in the first place. And that story is messier than anyone wants to admit. How the bodies left the desert. Before the CT scans stirred controversy, something else sparked the entire chain reaction. The moment these bodies were removed from their location. According to documented testimony, a man named Leandro Rivera claimed he removed dozens, possibly hundreds, of ancient remains from a cave in the Nazca region. Not artifacts, not ceramics, bodies. Rivera insisted some were tiny, others more developed, and all deeply unusual in shape. This wasn't a clean archaeological dig with scientists, labels, and protocols. This was the black market side of Peru's antiquities world, the part the Ministry of Culture has spent years battling. The Nazca Desert's dry climate preserves organic material shockingly well, which makes it a prime target for huaqueros, tomb raiders who know exactly what sells. And don't you think something this strange would attract a lot of interest? That's where this begins. In a cave where remains were taken without scientific oversight. It's the kind of origin story that instantly divides experts. Some argue that anything pulled from a black market chain is automatically compromised. Others argue that the conditions of discovery don't erase what's visible on imaging. Then, one name pushed the story into international attention: Jaime Maussan, the journalist who presented several specimens publicly. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, his involvement guaranteed one thing: no one would ignore these bodies anymore. Once images and X-rays hit the media, interest exploded. Here's the detail most people miss. Peru's institutions were already aware of fabricated alien dolls circulating in the region. Forensic archaeologist Flavio Estrada analyzed seized pieces and declared them artificially assembled with glue and synthetic components. But the bodies that underwent advanced CT imaging were not the same specimens that the ministry dismissed earlier. Different size, different structure, different internal composition. Think about the context here. The Nazca Desert isn't just any archaeological site. It's home to the famous Nazca Lines, massive geoglyphs that have puzzled researchers for generations. The region already carries an air of mystery, which makes it both a magnet for legitimate research and a breeding ground for sensational claims. When unusual mummies surface from this exact location, skepticism becomes automatic. But that same skepticism can blind investigators to genuine anomalies. The ministry's previous encounters with fakes created a framework where anything emerging from unofficial channels was presumed fraudulent, regardless of what testing revealed. By the time the bodies reached San Luis Gonzaga National University and foreign forensic teams, the question wasn't, are they alien? It was, what exactly are we looking at? And the imaging would reveal something that made that question even harder to answer. The metallurgical mystery. While forensic teams were mapping bone structures and documenting trauma, another detail kept appearing in the scans, something that shouldn't be there at all. Across multiple bodies, including Maria and others, CT scans showed polymetallic plates, high-density shapes embedded inside the bodies and on the surface. The metallurgical analyses listed materials including copper, cadmium, osmium, aluminum, gold, and silver, with over 95% purity. These weren't random scraps stuck inside a cavity. They appeared integrated, with edges conforming to surrounding tissue. Dr. José de Jesus Zalce argued these weren't post-mortem additions but biofunctional implants, objects the body did not reject, and that seemed placed with intentionality. He described them as having adapted to the organism in life. Think about what fabricating that would require. Someone would need to assemble bones, engineer metal implants with purity levels requiring advanced metallurgical processes, and do it in a way that survived high-resolution medical imaging without revealing obvious manipulation. The CT density signatures match real metal. Whether these were ceremonial additions, medical interventions, or something else entirely remains debated. But even skeptics acknowledge that the metallurgical findings are legitimate. Here's where it gets interesting. The placement of these metallic plates wasn't random. They appeared in specific anatomical locations across different specimens. Some near joints, others near organ cavities, almost as if they served a function. Modern medical implants are designed to integrate with surrounding tissue through biocompatible materials and careful surgical placement. If these plates truly date back 1,200 to 1,600 years, as carbon dating suggests, we're looking at a level of sophistication that shouldn't exist in ancient Peru. The purity levels alone, especially the silver and gold exceeding 95%, would require metallurgical techniques that historians don't associate with pre-Columbian cultures in that region. So now you can start to understand why many people thought that this discovery was alien mummies found in Peru. It's not a conclusion, but it's a reflection of how strange the evidence actually is. You have trauma patterns, metallic implants, anatomical consistency, and carbon dating placing. These remains between 1,200 to 1,600 years old. But the CT scans had one more surprise waiting, and when researchers discovered it, the case transformed from strange to genuinely shocking. The DNA that doesn't match. While CT imaging mapped the physical structures, another team was analyzing what remained of the genetic material, and their findings added another layer to an already complicated picture. DNA extraction from ancient remains is difficult. Degradation, contamination, and limited sample quality make it nearly impossible to get clean reads. But researchers managed to extract sequences from several specimens and ran them against modern reference databases. The results showed around 30% unknown DNA in some samples, genetic sequences that didn't match any cataloged organism. Before jumping to conclusions, understand what this actually means. Degraded ancient DNA often produces unmatchable fragments. Rare developmental defects can create unusual genetic signatures. Contamination during excavation or handling can introduce foreign DNA. Independent geneticist Elena Hardy stressed that unusual DNA signatures can emerge in individuals with developmental anomalies or poorly preserved remains. Jesse Michaels, another independent reviewer, said he found no evidence that they are not from Earth. Phrasing that sounds dismissive but actually means the DNA irregularities don't automatically imply extraterrestrial origin. Journalist Joyce Mantilla suggests these could represent an unknown hominin species, something that existed parallel to humans, biologically distinct but terrestrial. That interpretation fits the anatomical evidence better than either the complete hoax or alien visitor explanations. Think about what we actually know about ancient human variation. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis. We keep discovering hominin species that existed alongside modern humans, but looked dramatically different. Some had unusual skeletal features that would seem impossible if we didn't have physical evidence. The tridactyl hands and feet, the elongated skulls, the compact rib cages. These could represent adaptations we haven't cataloged yet. Or they could represent something else entirely. The DNA data sits in this uncomfortable middle ground where it's strange enough to demand explanation, but not clear enough to provide one. But here's where the scientific debate collides with institutional control. Because the DNA analysis, like everything else in this case, depends on who has access to the specimens. And that access has become the biggest obstacle to getting answers. Which brings us to what the CT scans found inside one particular body, a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about these specimens. Be prepared, because this part is truly strange.